Alright guys, I am back and I'm going to start this tutorial. So this one continues where we left off with our little FPS game we're designing here. We've got a couple interactable objects here that we designed. We just did some character movement so that I'm able to move around with the WASD keys, which was also programmable through the character right now. In the editor here, we can change the keys around to whatever we want using key codes. We also updated the way our character moves around so it doesn't walk through collider triggers anymore. And that was done using a rigid body. Before we had a character controller attached to it, and that essentially was working, but we wanted to utilize input key controls and also using the transform translate, which allows us to move around better, and it ties our animations in really well so that we know when we're moving and know when we're not, so we can kind of swap through stances. The rigid body edition allowed us to prevent us from walking through these objects, so that was a nice addition. Interactable objects, just basically hovering over them, was very simple. You can click on them and it was updating a small UI setup we made so that we could change the values in that. We also made a switch here that basically turns the light on and off, nothing too complicated. Mouse look was updated as well, so we could kind of look around. Before we had it where you wouldn't be able to move up and down; it was just left to right. So yeah, next thing I want to do is I want to design a little inventory system, because it's kind of like the pillars of game design in any game mostly. I find that RPGs, because this is where this thing's heading, will definitely need an inventory system. I don't think there's really been a game that didn't have some form of inventory systems, and I would like to make a system that is drag and drop, that has like its own UI that you can drag and drop things, and switch like the locations around. I also want to be able to display everything in icons, and then give us the option to allow us to build onto it. So perhaps we just start off with some basic statistics for every item, like maybe we can have an item that just has value on it for now, and a name. So, and then if we want to later on, we can add like health and stats that maybe correspond to our character's statistics, that, you know, like equipment and that sort of thing. So today's tutorial, we're basically going to just cover setting up a UI interface and coding that up so we can see inventory that we've added manually to it. So the first thing we're going to want to do is we're going to want to make some classes. Now, I've shown you before how to make some scripts here, and one of them in some of our earlier tutorials. If you're just coming in now, there's 3 more videos before this that basically detail everything in this little folder here that we've made. I believe it was the first one. We ended up making a game master, and then we also made a canvas that had an event system attached to it. And inside this canvas, we also added this script called MyGUI. And this script is going to hold everything inside it. And it'll be one of these game objects that we will be transferring from scene to scene. So it's essential that this and everything that has a UI functionality in it get buried inside this canvas in a nice, neat, and tidy way. So what we'll end up doing is adding a new object in here called inventory system, and then we can build and put icons and all that cool stuff inside it. So anything that does have a UI. We wouldn't want to keep it outside of here. We're going to want to keep it inside. And that's basically the idea of this canvas. It kind of holds everything in it. And if you look over in this scene, it's actually this big, huge white, or there's like an outline here. That's basically our giant canvas. So it looks kind of weird when we're in scene view because it looks like you would be able to see it if I walked over there. But it's actually set to screen space overlay. So you won't see it in-game as a 3D object, but you would see it over top. So it's kind of like a layer that doesn't show up. So how we're going to set this up. We'll get out of play mode here, and we're going to set up a new UI object. And I'm going to just set this to, let's see here. How will we want to do this? Have it as an image, so we could have like a cool background to it, right? And we'll call this inventory. Now we could leave raycasting on it for now. Raycasting essentially means that I can target it and it will react, so it'll know if I click on it. If I turn that off, it basically won't register any mouse clicks, and sometimes this is handy if you've got like something over top of another object, and that way you can actually go through it. So we'll leave that like that for now, but let's have a look at how big it is. And that looks a little small for an inventory system. Let's just scale it up. Let's make it relatively large, like that big. Well, maybe that's too much. Let's do 600 by 400, something relatively small so we can get the idea, and then just have a look at it here. So that would be a fairly nice size inventory system, and we can toggle it on and off. What we could do to make it kind of cool here is we can actually go into, we'll make a button. UI button. And we'll just drag this down to the corner, and we'll call this one inventory. All right. Now I'm going to scale this to, let's do 40 by 40. We should call this inventory button. All right. Now I noticed that got parented inside inventory. Let's get that out of there. We don't want that parented in here. Inventory button. We want all this stuff to be. We want it to be raycasted. Everything in here looks pretty good. Let's change the actual text here to say. Let's just put in for now, because we'll probably end up replacing that with a picture of like your inventory just to make it work better. Now, to make things very simple right now, what we could simply do is just add the inventory into this on-click section here. And this on-click section here can be scripted so it can disable and enable this simple game object here. So you just click on the no function section here and select game object, and we'll set active to true. Now this isn't exactly ideal because it's just going to basically switch it out. But just to get a simple system going right now, this will work, and then we can actually make a better toggling function here. So let's just see what happens if I go and disable this and click the button when I start the game. So I can see my inventory down here, which I should probably put on the other side. Now I can see that my inventory page pulls up. Now it's just going to keep doing that. It's not going to actually update. Now we should be able to possibly change this. What we could do is let's go inside our my GUI script, and we're just going to create a very simple way of toggling this page open and closed. I'm just opening up this new MyGUI script, and I'm going to attach a game object. We'll call this inventory page. Okay. And then I'm going to create a new variable or function, sorry, called public void toggle inventory. So what we're doing here is we're going to declare so we can view in our MyGUI section here, in this page here, we're going to basically have a new variable that I can drag and drop our inventory system in. Okay, so that's what that new variable is, game object inventory page. And then I'm creating a new function which I can then dial into that onClick command. And all we're going to do, well, first, before I do that, I need to create a bool. So originally we had it set in the onClick command over here. We had this thing set to true. And we're not able to actually set it to false. So it's really only a one-way street here. You can only turn it on, you can't turn it off. Which is kind of a pain in the butt. But what we'll end up doing is we're going to, instead of doing this value here, we'll basically choose a script that's going to be added down below here. Okay? So we're going to do a little toggle inventory, and in order for that to work, we just have to do an inventory page toggle switch. All right, so that's basically set to false by default, and that's fine. And what we're going to do is we're going to do a very simple way of doing this, and that is inventory page dot set active to this. So what essentially this is doing is we are taking this game object and we're setting it active, and we're just flipping the bool. So right now it's the bool set to default when it loads, and then this little exclamation mark here is basically just going to flip it and say it's true. And then if we toggle this button again, it's going to flip it back to false. And it's a very simple way of toggling. Okay? So that is good. We can go ahead and compile that. And then we'll go into our game here, and we're just going to update this information here. So we've got this inventory page, and we got this page toggle switch. What we're going to do is we'll toggle in our inventory page by dragging and dropping. So right now it's set to disabled, so make sure you have it set to disabled so you can't see it. And then simply drag it over to our canvas. Now, to make my life easier, I'm going to change this thing that says canvas, and I'm going to call it MyGUI. Because it just makes more sense for me. I should probably do capital. Yeah, that looks better. MyGUI. All right. So that looks good. Now the next thing we want to do is go to our actual inventory button, which we've got here. We're not going to use this inventory thing anymore. We're actually going to drag in our MyGUI. Okay. And then you see that it's basically resetted everything. Now you notice that there's this little script down here. Instead of having the basic default options, we got a new one, which allows us to actually make functions and add them into here. So we've now got this one called toggle inventory, which is what we created here. And because we set it to public, it's able to show up in there. If we had set it to private, you wouldn't be able to see. Okay. So anything that has very simple functions to it will show up in there. But if I add something in there that has like arguments, like say I wanted to do like bool inventory, I'm just putting in a temporary bool in here, inventory temp, this value won't show up anymore, I don't believe. See how it's like erased it on us? Sorry, it's not that it's. Oh, well, actually, that one, because it's a simple one, it will work. Let's put something in there more complicated, like an integer. I didn't realize that it could take a bool still. That's kind of cute. That's kind of cool. Let's go over here. Now it shouldn't take it. Oh my god, it takes integers too. Okay, so typically, I didn't know it did that. That's news to me. Typically, when you get more complicated functions, it won't take them. And I'm guessing this is still a relatively simple function. Maybe this has been updated in the future, but that's really good news. I learned something today. That's awesome. But let's say we had like, I don't know, say we created an item and it was a new class and we wanted to call it like item. And right now we don't have a class called item made yet, but we're going to make one soon. Essentially that wouldn't take, and it would just, you can't really run it because the information, you just can't pass it through that on-click command. This stuff's kind of limited. So you can only really do so much. It'll only provide you some information here, okay? So with that being said, we have to keep it relatively simple. And in this case, we're passing the information that we're storing in our canvas or my GUI script into here and allowing it to do all the storing and that sort of stuff. So it's a very simple way of doing this. And let's go give this a shot. Let's see what happens. So let's just reset this back to toggle inventory, and there's no information in there because we're storing that bool over here. Okay. Now I just realized something. We have to actually toggle up here. So what we actually have to do is we'll do inventory toggle switch equals that. So now we're setting the variable and flipping it and then going in here, because before that all we were doing is flipping the false to true. So every time we went in there it would have just been true, 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 but we actually have to set the value. Okay, so now every time we go in there and click the button, right now it would be set to false. It's going to flip it, set it to true, and then save that, and then go over here and apply that to the set active function so that inventory page opens or closes, and then everything's saved. And if we go back in there, it switches it from true to false and applies it to the set active function, and now we got ourselves a simple little open and close button. So let's give that a go. Everything's attached. We've got our inventory attached. This is set to false, and so is our inventory. Let's see if this thing works. Where is it? Open, close, open, close, open, close. Pretty awesome. So now we got ourselves a working inventory button. That gives us something to build on. Now there are some things that we'll have to fine tune later on. So for instance, if we have like a close button on our inventory, we could dial in through here. So we could do that really quickly. Let's go into our inventory system, and we'll just make a little close button at the top here. So right click, UI, add a new button. Let's set this one. We'll make it 30 by 30 so it's nice and small. We'll call this close inventory. All right. And then inside here, we will just do like an X. Okay. And then drag and drop it all the way. I think I'm going to have to move everything over like that. I'm going to move my inventory over here as well. Probably good there. We got a close button. Got our inventory page. Now, the same thing with this one. We're simply just going to add that my GUI script. my GUI, toggle inventory, and they should work. Let's save our project, go ahead and run this and see if everything works. So we'll make sure we disable that. Okay. We can open up our inventory and we can close it from here. And the same thing over there. Everything works. A nice fluid loop. Okay. Awesome. All right. So we could essentially close the inventory from any button we want in this inventory here, as long as everything remains underneath this little canvas here. Those buttons will all work. So if you have like further windows you want to make, like an abilities page, same kind of setup. You can get it all fired up. You can get it interactable and working before you start adding all the buttons and things like that. But yeah. So if you were to have like in my game, I ended up having an escape button that like closes them all. You could have that button push access all of the scripts that you created. So right now I'm accessing toggle inventory. You could add a second one down here and toggle abilities page, that sort of thing. So pretty cool stuff you can do. All right, next is let's actually make the inventory system. So I haven't shown you guys how to make a base class here. So this one is a little different than all these types of scripts we've made before. But this one here, we're going to right click anywhere inside here and just hit C# script, and we're just going to call this one item. Okay. Double click on it. And now you notice that we have this new script called item. Now it's got everything we want, except for we don't want to inherit anything here. We're making a base class, okay? So this will be our base class called item. And the difference between Monobehaviour and not having Monobehaviour is this item cannot be used on a game object. So whenever you put that Monobehaviour, it allows us to attach it to Unity stuff. Without that, it basically is kind of like a hidden script that you can use for stuff that attaches to it. Like I can attach it in here as a variable, but you can't actually drag and drop it in here. It won't do anything. It's just like it lacks all those features that Monobehaviour has. Now I was able to add that there because I think it still had the Monobehaviour added to it, but watch this. It shouldn't be able to do that now. It looks like it's updated. Let's see if I can add it. I don't recall you can do that. Yeah, see, can't add script behavior item. The script needs to derive from Monobehaviour. So Monobehaviour instructs it with a whole bunch of stuff. It's like little tiny functions and things like that that allow it to open up on here. So this is what we call just like a base class. And we're going to use this to store our items. Hence why it's called item. Inside here, we'll store things like you can store anything you want pertaining to your item, but I'm going to start off with like its name and its value, just to make it very simple. But going forward, you could add in like any sort of stat. Maybe you can add in like the name of a texture, a 2D icon. We should definitely add icons because that'd be nice to see them. So I'll add that along with the other two things I mentioned. So anything in here can be added to your desire. You basically just, once I show you the core functions of how you add this stuff, we can build onto it. So let's start off with public string. Let's do item name, because if I just did name, it gets very confused with a lot of functions, because for instance, if I did like, let's just say I had like a public game object. I'll call it something for now, and I did something dot name. People get confused with these two things. It's not actually something that's named up here. It's actually the name of the game object in the game. So it just, I found it super confusing when I started programming. I'm like, why is this called name? And I used to do it that way. So there are certain variables that you will never want to use as names or as your variable name. So sometimes it's just best to kind of like do a thing like item name. Okay. So now that we've declared this string called name, we'll be able to store, so the item's called like chainmail. Well, now we can store that information in here. So when we look at it in our game, it's going to be called chainmail, and it's readable. It makes sense, and it can sort different items by those names. The next thing we're going to want to do is we will add. Let's do a sprite. Sprite equals item icon. Okay. So what we're doing here is we're storing a little tiny picture file that we'll add in here later on, and it will be used for all of our items. Okay. Next thing we're going to want to do is, what was the other one? Oh, value. So we'll just do public int item value. Oops. Now value is another issue. If I was just to type in value, you might run yourself into some problems. So let's stick with item value, and let's hit compile. Now these two functions do not do anything now. So if I was to type in public void start, it has no effect like a Monobehaviour version. So these things aren't like reserved functions that Monobehaviour uses. So whenever you create a new class in Unity, it comes with these two things here, and they are, you know, it even says here, this one's called before the start or the first frame update, and this one says the update is called once per frame. That does not apply anymore to this because we took the Monobehaviour off. So just keep that in mind. These do absolutely nothing, and the only way to access them is actually type them by this. So very confusing. Get rid of them. They are not needed. Okay. Let's see here. Now with our game here, there are a couple little tricks here to get things to work. We're going to have to learn how to use lists, and lists are ways of storing a whole bunch of stuff in one variable. So right now we're going to want to store a list of all these different items we carry in the game, and the easiest way to do that will be to store that in our myGUI script. Okay. Let me just clean up my desktop here. All right. Now, before we move on to anything else, we need to create a thing called a constructor. And what this does is, so whenever, right now we have just like this base class here, but whenever we create it, we want to actually tell it what to do by default. So right now, when I create this class, it doesn't know what to do. So that's what we call these things called constructors. And basically it is, you just do this. You just do public item. All right, so it has to be named the same as it is on the class. And we do a little curly brackets here. And what we're going to do is actually grab these variables and we're going to store in some default information. Okay, so when we first create a class, it's going to fill in this information right at the starting, so it's not empty and full of null information. And that way we know that, hey, something went wrong. I haven't named this item properly because I can see that it's called need name. Otherwise, it would just be empty and you wouldn't be able to see it, and you'd be like, what's going on? Why is everything empty? So this kind of like makes it easy for us to understand. And that's kind of the idea we're going for here. Hold on one sec, my camera just crapped out. Alright, camera, what is it? There we go. I don't know why it does that, it just all of a sudden stops working. So the next one we will be doing, and this is a tough one, we can't really load a default sprite icon, so we can just leave that one empty. There are functions we can do, but for now we'll just leave that one empty. And for default value, let's just do equals 100. Okay. Now we got some default value that it'll create. All right. There are other types of constructors we can do, like we can actually make multiple constructors. So I'm just going to type in here constructor. Okay, so we got our basic constructor. You can make like newer types of constructors. Okay. The next thing we want to do is actually, and it's not necessary, but sometimes it's easier to work with if we want to actually set these things called getters and setters. I think we could probably skip it, but essentially what you can do is make your life a little easier by setting up these things where it'd be like, let's say it's this, it's like public int item value, so it's nice and clean looking, like this. And then we'll put in get return this, and then set equals value. So what basically we're doing here is, and it looks a little funny at first because it's kind of different looking. This might make it a little bit more similar. What basically we're doing is, it's no different than accessing this value if it's set to public. It just allows us to access this little setter here, or getter, depending on how you want to use it. And we just pass a variable and it kind of does the information for us. They're not necessary. You can still access it by just putting like say we had a new item and we had access to it, we can just type in like, say it was called, this item was called item name or item value, and you just do dot item value and you can get into there, no problem. So this is an option. I can kind of show it to you when we get to it. All right. So the next thing we want to do is create another class. And this one is going to be a class that organizes our inventory of items inside a list. Okay, so we're going to have two types of lists. Let's discuss lists now. My GUI, where are we? Yeah, this is the one. So just slide that in here. So this one here, we've got our inventory system. We can leave these in here because we might be using them. We're going to create a new one called public inventory. So public list not inventory, items. Okay. And call this one inventory. Jeez, I'm spelling this horrible. Inventory items, okay? Equals new list items. Now, we're noticing that I have a spelling mistake in here, so that's why it's red. So let's just fix that, because we called it item, not items. All right. So now we've got this new list here. Now, if you had any problems and you're not, like, you're getting a weird error that says like no such thing as list or whatever, it's probably because you haven't added this system collections generic. This allows us to use the list function. So if you are missing that, just make sure you have the proper systems up here. That allows us to use this information. That's what these things are for. When you need more, when you have certain things that aren't reading down here, like it doesn't know what it is, it's probably because you're missing a declaration up here for some sort of systems tools. So just keep that in mind. So now that we've got the inventory items set, then that's basically going to store all of our inventory items in a list. The next one we'll want is public list. Now, I just realized we can't make that one yet. We need to make another class like items called slot inventory. Let's go to back to our Unity here, and it's probably going to want to compile a couple things. Oh, looks like it's done. Let's create a new script. We'll call this one slot inventory. Okay. And then let's double click. There we go. We got to get this one to move over here. Here, let's join these all together. Confusing the hell out of me. Oh. Probably don't need target fruit or any of these actually open. I'm gonna leave game master, toggle lights good, character movement, yeah, we're all good there. I think this one's done. We don't need it. Ah, the hell. Oh, I see it. Come on, get in there, Doc. Well, it looks like somehow I've undocked everything here. Let's close that and try this again. What a pain in the butt. Let's open up one that I've closed. Character action. There we go. Nope. That's funny. Item. What the frig? I close that, it just reset window layout. This is good. This is great. Okay, well, whatever. I'm gonna put you in there. We got you open. Good. All right, so back into that script there. It looks like slot inventory is now opened. So we're going to do the same thing as we did with the items, okay? So we're going to erase the Monobehaviour. We'll get rid of all these, okay? Now we're going to set a few new variables. Just give me 1 second here. All right. So we're going to do the same thing. We've got everything we need up here. We're going to set a couple variables here. So we want to set a rect. So the reason why we're setting a rect here, and what a rect is it's going to be inside our inventory here, and we're going to create a series of buttons, UI buttons, okay? So there'll be like a whole pile. So let's open this up and I'll show you what I mean. We got a button in, we got a button in there right now, okay? And we'll make it nice and square. Let's call it 30 by 30. And this will be our actual inventory. This will be one piece of item or whatever, one potion. And then we'll just keep making more and we'll move them around like this, right? So we want to store that information in our slot inventory. All right, so we'll call this one button rect. Okay. The next thing we're going to want to do is actually do a series of ints here. So we'll call this one int slot. Okay. So this one's going to pertain to this one will be utilized by our list. So we're going to have a list that's attached to our MyGUI script that stores all these things in a sequential value. So you have like list item 1 will be this one, and list item 2 will be this one, list item 3 will be this one. So we have to store that information inside here, right? And then because we have rows and things like that, we're also going to need to know that information, right? So we'll do public int x and public int y, and then public int occupied. Now the reason why we have public int occupied is because all of these, what we're going to do is we're actually going to create a list that contains the exact amount of buttons we've made for our game. So hypothetically, our game will have, let's say, like 40 inventory slots. We're going to create a list that stores 40 of these in it, and some of them might be empty, some of them might not be. And this is going to be our simple little, sorry, that's supposed to be a bool, and this is going to be a simple bool that says, hey, this one's occupied, and if it isn't, then we can tell our system here that, hey, don't display anything in here because it's empty, and we'll just put like a default icon that looks like it's empty. So it's a simple way of displaying an inventory system and referencing everything to a giant list. Okay, so that is good. It's quite possible that some of this information might not be needed. I'm wondering if I can do it without that, but in the past, that's what I've used. What we're going to do is we'll just do a simple constructor so that we don't have empty information, and that way I won't set issues for our game. So we're going to do public slot inventory, curly brackets, or brackets and then curly brackets, and we're just going to set button rect equals new rect, and then we'll just give it some default values, and I think we were setting them at 30 by 30. Let's actually set it to 40 because I think it's a better size. That being said, we'll have to change all of our items here to 40 and 40 and spread them out a little bit better. Okay, want them nice and tight here. Oh. All right. All right, next value, you want to do public, what am I doing? I need to do slot equals 0. I can copy this and basically repeat it for the next two values, x, x, y. So we're just basically setting this stuff all to 0, and occupied will be set to false. All right. Now this is probably redundant, but it's always good to have Constructor set up because you can get errors down the road and you don't really know. This information is definitely needed if we're going to utilize it. Otherwise, it would just be an empty Rect with no information, and we'd have to create it. So that's good. I'm going to hit compile. I don't know where it went. There it is. Okay. Trying to figure out how to get this thing to go in. What a pain in the butt. All right. So that should all be updated. Let's just have a look at our MyGUI and see. We can't see any of that stuff because they're lists. Now, what we can do is a little trick here is I want to be able to see these things in the editor, even though like they're designed not to show up. So we can add this function in here, and it looks a little different than these using statements. It's called system.serializable. And what this does is it allows us to see a list. So if I create this public list here, I will be able to see the list of all these items in it. And they might not show everything we need in there, but at least they show us a list and we can see the count and that sort of stuff. So we have to do that also to the item. Now we should be able to see those lists. All right. And now it shows up. It says it's empty. It's got none in there, but if I hit 1, you'll be able to see that we get this cool little drop down and we can actually type in our cool values, right? And we can even type in some, we can even find like an icon if we wanted to. All right, so that's an easy way to start debugging your inventory items and see if it actually populates up here. So that's done. We also need to add in another list here called public list slot inventory items. Do a little bracket, or sorry, little caret bracket there, and do slot. I'm gonna call this one. It's a little bit backwards, but inventory slots. Now let's do slot inventory equals new slot list inventory. All right. So we always have to do new list and then a little caret brackets and closing brackets and semicolon whenever we create a list. If you don't, the inventory or the editor doesn't know what to do with it, and it's a null list. So it needs to be created. Okay, you can create it in the start function down here, or you can create it right up in the editor here. But it's definitely got to be done. Okay. So that is compiled. We should now see another list down here. Perfect. Okay. Now let's go ahead and we're gonna have to create a bunch of icons here, and it's a bit of a pain in the butt, but it can be done in script if you wanted to. But I like to kind of do the manual route sometimes, just because I get a better understanding of how things are done. And I'm going to want to name these to something simple, like, or not something simple, but something sequential, all right? But I should start this off with 0, 1, 2, 3. Because when it comes to lists, it always starts off at 0, all right? Looks like this one's just a shade. Oh, this one's 1. You got to be careful with that too. Sometimes when you copy things, the order gets a little messy. if you're copying bundles of stuff. All right. It looks fairly lined up. So we got 0, 1, 2. Let's go ahead and copy some more. And it's too bad that it adds the brackets on it, because this would make our life pretty easy if it didn't. So this one will be, looks like 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. This one is 5. And this one is 3. We'll just reorder those. We got 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And you definitely want to make sure that this stuff's in nice, clean order. We'll go ahead and duplicate these again and move them over. This one is 6. Move it up. 7. 8. 9. 8. 9. 10. 11. All right, that's probably good for now. You could go ahead and add the whole bunch if you want. Maybe I'll just add one more, make it 12. So it's nice and full. All right. There we go. We got 12. Now what we could do, we should actually make another row, just so we can see the functionality of how it's going to row out. Let's do that. This will be 13. 14. 15. 16. 17. 18. 19. 20. 21. 22. 23. 24 and 25. Now, I think I should probably set them up in a better order. We've got I think I want to have them in rows of 10. Let's do this. Oops. And grab the last 4. There. Okay, so now we got ourselves 25. And it's set to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Rows of 11. I might have screwed that up, but we'll see. What we're going to do is click on our My GUI script and go up here and lock it. All right. We're just going to drag all of these buttons inside there. Okay. Oh, we messed something up here. We can't actually drag those in there because those are a particular object. Let's see here. We'll have to do it in code and add it in there. Let's not do it this way. We could actually do it by script, because this is kind of a pain in the butt. Let's delete all that. Well, here, I'm going to disable it just in case I do need it. Let's I'm going to create an empty game object, and it's going to stuff them in there. I might need them, I don't know here. I'm going to see if I can do it by script to make our lives easier, but let's just stick it up there and hide it. Oops. Let's hide that. Okay. But what we're going to do is create a default icon, all right? So we go into inventory, we will create default UI button. Okay. We'll set it to 40. All right. And everything looks good up there. We'll just call this default button. All right. And we could hide it up there. So the next thing we want to do is we're going to actually dynamically populate these buttons in a nice little thing using our MyGUI script. And we'll add in something that has like a row of things. So we'll have like 10 by here and however many by the Y coordinates. So we can actually just automatically fill that crap up, okay? Every time the game loads. So inside the MyGUI script, let's add a couple bits of information here. So we're gonna want to how can we do this here? We need to create some new variables. So we're going to do let's do an int. We'll call this one, and we're gonna make these private. So we'll do private int. Oops, int. We'll just call this one inventory rows. Okay. And what can we call? How many values? We'll do let's just say like 9 equals 9. So we'll have 9 rows of inventory. Okay. And we'll do another one called private int. And I'm putting these little tiny underscores in front of it so that when I look at later on, when I look at this information, say I like type in a command to try and find some variables. If I see that as an underscore, then I know it's private. And it's just an easier thing to work with when you do that, so you can kind of tell yourself. So we're going to call this one inventory. Oops. Let's call it calls. Okay. Equals 10. Perfect. All right, next thing we want to do is we're going to make a little script that will create this for us. So I'm actually going to create a new function that does it. We'll call this one public void create inventory buttons. All right. And we'll do a little brackets and curly brackets. And inside here, I'm going to do how we want to do this. We'll do a loop. Now, I don't know if I've shown you loops before, but loops are really awesome at using when we're working with lists. You're always going to be using at least some form of loop or there's other commands too, like for each, and basically what it does is just goes through the list one by one from 0 all the way to the end of the size of the list, and then it you can use that information that you grab and then do stuff with it. So with our inventory buttons, we're basically going to loop over our counts here and create a bunch of buttons inside this list, store them in the list, and then also populate them on scene. So looking at this, I'm going to do a for loop. So this one it's set by a value. We got int equals int cnt equals 0. So we're going to start the loop at 0, okay? And what we're doing here is we're creating a temporary variable called cnt, which is probably short for count. We're setting it to 0, so it starts off at 0. And then we're going to do cnt is less than, we're going to multiply it by our two variables here. We got inventory columns, inventory columns, and then we'll times it by inventory rows, okay? And then, and then we'll do cnt++. And we'll close it off. So just to go over what this loop and how it works. So we're basically starting off the loop with the for loop. That's what they're called. We bracket the whole thing, okay? Kind of like a function is. What the loop's going to do is literally just looping over each item inside the list. So every item in a list is sorted by an index, okay? Inside the list, we're going to start off at the first one, which is 0. You could start off wherever you want by setting this value to a different value if you wanted to. So you wanted to skip the first one, you could do skip 0, which is your first in the list. And yeah, you could skip one if you wanted to. But typically this is how you're doing them. Sometimes you can reverse it. So we start off setting this temporary variable called cnt equals 0. And then we're going to check that variable and see, we're going to make sure that it's less than our total value. So we don't want this loop to exceed 9 times 10. All right, so it's not going to loop past 90. So it's not going to do this more than 90 times, okay? And then every time we go through inside this loop, so every time it does it, it basically just tells it, hey, add one. And that's what this plus does, okay? So it'll start off in the loop. It's going to find the first index, which is 0, which will be our first item in the list or inventory button. And then it's going to check, hey, we're at 0. That's good. We're lower than 90. Proceed. All right, let's add 1 to this count. Do whatever you ask. And then come back up and do it again. We'll be at index 1 now. And it's going to check that it's lower than 90 and proceed. And then if it is, it's going to add this. Do whatever we ask and then move over to 2. And that's basically the functionality of a loop. Very complex. Don't ask me why it's all designed this way. That's just how it is. That's just the way they told us how we do loops. Once you get familiar with them, you can start manipulating these values. So you can go backwards. If you wanted to go backwards, you could essentially do this and make this a negative. Oops, negative, and you could switch that around. So it's like 0 now. I don't know. It's totally up to you. You could totally do that backwards if you want. But yeah, you can manipulate these values. As long as it works, you'll know. It'll throw an error. You'll basically get an index error if something goes outside of those bounds. So if I accidentally added something else in here that took it past 90 and my list doesn't jive with it, it's or say I added like 1,000, well, this is going to create 1,000 inventory items, and it might exceed our inventory page, so we can't see them all. But essentially, this loop is basically going to operate whatever we ask. And if you do get index problems, it'll show up in your console, and you'll see an error. So with that being said, let's just let's compile that, and we'll go back in. All right. So the next thing we want to do is let's see here. We've got to take this thing here. All right. And we're going to do one more check. We're going to do if inventory dot count, okay, is less than I'm gonna do this here. I'm just gonna copy it. Okay. I'll grab the brackets too, because we want to make sure that it's in brackets. If we didn't have brackets, it's not really gonna know what to do. It probably still would work, but you always want to bracket anything like this, because then basically what's it going to do is do that calculation before it does this one. Sometimes you can run into problems with not putting things in brackets. Okay. So just ensure you do that. I'm going to slip that. Shoot. I'm going to slip that right in here. Okay. And I'm going to close that off. Now inside here, I'm going to set two variables. We'll call this one int y. We're going to do a thing called CNT, sorry. All right, and then I'll do int x equals CNT percent 10. All right. I forget what this is. It's called modulus. This is kind of a complicated thing. It's hard to explain, but basically what it does is it's going to allow us to sort our inventory slots in a particular way that it's going to populate them down into rows for us. Okay. Let's actually, I don't know if I need to do this just yet. Let's see here. We need to declare a new variable here for our default default button. So we're going to do public rect or I think we'll do rect. Yeah, rect button default button. Okay. I have to look at my notes here. Inventory. Okay. Here we go. This is what. So back to my GUI. We want to go through here. Going to do a temporary game object called slot equals. Now we're going to do this. We're going to slip the key here. We're going to do an instantiate in brackets default button. Okay, so what this is doing is we're going to change this to game object, not rect. So what we're doing here is we're storing a variable in here that basically it only is accessible inside this one. So every time it loops, it's going to redo this variable. So every time I do one loop, it's going to have this variable in here, and we're going to create it. And then once it's done doing what it wants, it'll move on to the next loop and purge all that information so we don't need it anymore. And then do it all over again and store it, instantiate it, blah, blah, blah. And it just keeps looping until the count is met. And it's created a whole bunch of default buttons. So the default button is something we'll add in here. Okay. Let's go over here in our my GUI here, and we'll add this default button, which will be, where'd it go? This one here. Okay. Just dragging it right inside there. So what it'll do is it'll create us a new default button, and I'm going to make it populate inside inventory, and it's just going to throw them down in the bottom here in a nice order for us. Okay. All right. So with that being stored, we will do, let's see here. Got that thing in there. We're going to want to set the name. All right, so the slot. So we're taking the game object called slot, and we're taking its name, and we're actually going to set it to cnt.toString. So what this is doing, and I want it to name in that nice order we had originally, or it was like 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. I want it to be accessed like that because we might need to know what slot number each one of those buttons pertains to, and this is a really simple way of getting that information sorted out. So we're basically grabbing this thing as we loop through it. This thing is going to be incrementing. We're going to convert that integer, which is set to, and with this toString, it allows us to convert it into something that we can read, and I can output it to the name, which is also a string too. So we couldn't just do that, right? Because it wants a string value. So that's what this command does, the toString. All right, and you have to make sure you put 2 brackets on the end of it in order to work, because it's kind of like a function. All right, so that's done. The next thing we want to do is we actually want to set the slot.transform, and we're setting its parent to the inventory system. So I'm just going to do this.gameObject transform. Okay. So what this is doing is if I didn't have this line in there, it'd create 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 over in the hierarchy here, which will be outside of our canvas, and then you won't be able to actually click them, and it would be a huge mess. So I want to keep it inside this folder so it's nice and neat and tidy. It's also going to utilize the canvas screen here. So if anything that's like a UI button outside of here, you won't be able to click it. Might not even show up. I can't remember. But anything that's a UI function has to be stored inside here. All right. So back to that, we will. We've got that all sorted out. Well, let's see how that looks. Let's just comment this out and see what happens when I go to run this. You'll probably see a whole bunch of them that just keep going. Actually, you'll probably see a whole bunch of them stacked on top of each other. I think that's what's going to happen. Let's move the default button and run this. Everything looks good. Oh, it's not going to do anything because I haven't run it. We'll take that default button. Okay. I'm going to add this in there. And I'm going to grab create inventory. Let's see what happens. Boom. You see how it added a whole bunch of buttons? All the way up to 90. So 89 basically including button 0. So that's 90. And I just hijacked it into this button here. So it essentially created all those little buttons. Now they're not inside my inventory system. And that's probably because I wrote the script inside the my GUI. So it actually added it to the wrong spot. So what we can do, 2 tricks to fix that. One trick to fix that, and another trick will fix so that it's run when we start all of it. So back into here, I'm going to set it to this. All right. So see how it says slot transfer and set parent. I'm going to change it from this script, which is the my GUI game object. I'm going to do this because it's already set to a game object. I don't have to write game object in there already, even though it will work. I could still do that, but essentially that's redundant. So let's get rid of it. The dot game object basically converts the script into a game object by reading what it's attached to. That's why I did dot game object. So now that should set the proper parent to the inventory page. I also want to run this right when the game starts. So I'm going to just do a create inventory buttons right here. So in order to run this function, before I added it to here, it was never really going to be ran, and that's why I added it to the button. But using the start function or the update, you could slip that in there, and now it'll run that right on the start. You wouldn't want to add that to your update function because it would just keep running it and creating a whole pile over and over and over and over, and you'd probably have a Stack Overflow and your game would freeze and you'd crash. But in the start function, because this is basically run once and right when the game starts and it'll never be ran again, that's safe to add it in there. So let's see if our script will add it inside the new inventory and it'll create all of them at the starting. And it does. Nicely tucked in our inventory here. We got a whole bunch of them. You can move them around and see that they're all there, but they're all stacked on top of each other, which is not what we want. We want to increment them. And that's what that next line of code was that I commented out here. Oops. I'm just going to hit Control K and C, and that basically comments it, but it did the opposite. Let's undo that. Damn it. This really sucks that they're not connected. I'll have to erase it manually. So just erase those comments. Get the alignment proper too. All right. We're going to sit here and do slot.get component. All right. And we're going to grab the Rect transform. There it is. All right. So what we're going to be doing is grabbing the button's location here, the Rect transform. Now, game objects have a transform, but it's not called Rect. It's called transform. So there, it's a little different. You can't access the game object transform on a button. Once it's in the inventory, once it's in like the canvas system, it goes into a different transform, which you have to go through Rect transform. If you try to access it, it's not going to do anything. And that is because this is considered like 2D stuff, and this stuff's considered 3D. All right. Back over here, Rect transform. Close the brackets off. Dot local position equals new vector 3. And then how are we going to do this? We're going to do slot we want to increment it. We're taking the local position, which is this. Okay, we're basically going to move them along and then move them along. We might be able to just whip this up. Let's just try CNT times 40. You know what? Sorry, I'm going to comment this out. I want to add a tiny bit of padding. And instead of adding in like hard coding this stuff in here, we could create some public variables that might give us some freedom to customize this later on. So let's create a couple variables. We're going to do public int button width, public int, you know what? Because it's going to be square, let's call it button size. And then public int button padding, and we'll set these by default in here. So 40 equals 5. All right. So that'll allow us to have a little bit of padding between each button. It'll also allow us to have a default size of 40, and then we can plug that information in here instead of hard coding it. So let's go button size, and then we'll just do a button padding. So it's going to go 0 times button size, which is going to be 0, plus 5. Let's do this. We want to do this function first and then times it, okay? I think that's the proper way of doing it. Otherwise, it'll start looking... you know what? That actually probably is the wrong way. Yeah, this is the right way. We want to run this first. So 0 times, or 1 times button size will be 40, and then we're adding 5. Otherwise, you would get the padding would start stacking, and we're multiplying it by that. We don't want to do that. We just want to add 5 when it's done. Now that's the x-axis, so that's going to be moving along. All right. I think I might be messing something up here. All right, well, let's just see what happens. I don't want to actually have this on right now. I'm going to need it in a second, but I want to see what happens before I utilize that. So this should basically give us a nice line, and then we'll figure out how to start stacking the Y. I just want to make sure this is going to work properly. So it should just make a huge line of them. And it did perfectly. And they're nicely spaced out. Now we just need to sort out when it does its call, or sorry, when it does the next line. All right. Let's try do. Can't remember which one it is. I think I might have these backwards. Let's try Y. Just plug in Y there and times it by the button size. Sorry, CNT. So let's just do the math here in my head, or not in my head. Say the index was 22. We're going to do divided by 10. That would put us on row 2, which is good. And let's just say it was 44 divided by 10. Will put me on 4. So that seems right. Why do I even need the modulus creator here? So let's see what happens. We don't need CNT. We're just going to put in Y times button size plus padding. All right. Let's see what happens now. It might look like a staircase. It is. Let's see what's happening here. Yes, okay. So it's not resetting in X, and that's what the modulus part is for. It needs to reset the X. So we had this right for the first row, but we need to do this. Let's see what happens now. A little bit out of spot, but we got ourselves a really cool looking inventory system all created up, and look, buttons all work. You can all interact with them. Pretty nifty. So what the modulus is doing, it's basically saying how many times does this thing go into our row count. So if I had 44, so say I'm on like this value is 40. Sorry, we're at count 44. It's basically going to say how many times does 44 go into 10? Or sorry, how many times does 10 fit into 44? And so it's going to say 4 times. And then it's going to ask me how much is left over. And that's your answer. So it's kind of like, so here's my equation. I'm at index 44. It's going to ask me how many times does, how many times does 10 go into 44? Then what is left over is our number. So I can kind of write this inside here so it makes a little bit of sense. It's a very like mind twist to think about it, but essentially all we're trying to do is find out how much is left over, and that's what we're incrementing for. So if I'm on like as I'm moving along, it's going to like, it'll be like 45 or say our index is 45, well then this x is going to be 5. And if it's 46, it's going to be 6. And then after I get to like 51, it goes back to 1. And that's what we're using to increment along on our actual column. And that's a little fancy trick. It took me a little while to figure that sort of thing out, but this is one of those functions that like I didn't even really know about it existing in programming until I got to a certain point. I was like, oh my god, there's a math equation that does that, because it seems so ridiculous. Like, what purpose would you ever want to know how much is left after you place so many of those tens in there, right? Like, it's weird. I just never thought of a use for it, but like, it is so important for this. Like, how else could you do it, right? You'd have to like manually place all your slot items like we were doing at the starting there, but this allows us to kind of increment properly. Okay, so that is done. We might want to set a default location, because right now everything is being tossed in a particular spot. Now there's two ways we can do that. We could add a game object in here that's centered right here, and I think that's probably the easiest way to do it. Is we go like, we will create a new game object, or an empty object rather, and we will move it wherever we want this inventory to start displaying. We'll put it there, and instead of our MyGUI grabbing our inventory page, we should we should rename that variable. Call it, let's rename it to, now if you want to rename something project wide, instead of just going in here and typing a new name, it'll start throwing errors for all the other spots that haven't been renamed properly. So you'd have to go around and double click this and redo that. You can actually right click it, hit rename, and it'll actually, you can see that it's highlighted this one. You can go in here and call it something different. So I'm going to call it inventory item storage. Spelling mistake. It's got to be right. Inventory item storage, right? So now it updated that properly, and also down here too. I like that naming. What I'm going to do is I'm going to call this one here inventory storage as well, and just redo this spot here. So inventory item storage is now going to stuff it all in there. And let's see if it takes. All right, somehow it went out of place. Let's make note of this location. Let's put it nice and tidy over here. So we're going to do -270, -160, and that should place us. Just copy that while we're in this view. Okay. And we'll just apply that over in the corner, and it should do it properly. Now you could have created this script in here to factor in the offset of where that location was, but it just seems so much easier to do it this way. And we may have to do that at some point if we run into problems, but this is going to work for now. Okay. All right. So that is a nice setup. We haven't actually added any items in it, but we've created a nice inventory system. I think I'm going to stop here, and in our next video we will discuss how to link up our newly created classes so that it utilizes the proper information, and it'll use a new icon and all that fancy stuff. Oh, looks like I gotta update that. Let's do that before I quit. Inventory button, toggle inventory. Let's change that before we forget. So we do need to make a new one. We'll call this one public game object inventory page. All right. Now let's just grab that and go down here and update that with inventory page. Okay. So we'll have two objects that are available now in our My GUI script. The old inventory page there and the item inventory storage. The reason why our inventory wasn't toggling properly is because it was toggling our storage container and not the actual page. So with that all minimized, we just have to go into our My GUI script and attach the inventory page, which is right here. And everything should work with that button. Okay. All right. So thanks for watching. We're going to continue this in our next tutorial. We'll discuss how to link up our buttons to our item class and ensure that all of our information is displayed with little pictures, the name of it and the value, and then that'll give you a nice base to work with. So yeah, be sure to follow or subscribe so you can watch the next one. And just so you know, this is brought to you by Journey for the Crown, a game I'm working on. If you want to check out the game, you can visit my website, journeyforthecrown.com. There's tons of cool stuff in there. A lot of this is inherited from it. All this inventory system is stuff I've learned through making that game. So if you want to visit my website or even like me on Facebook, that really goes to help these tutorials out. And I do also have a Patreon account on my Twitch page. So make sure you head on over there. And if you want to see more of these tutorials, maybe even if you feel like spending a little bit of money and donating to my Patreon account, I will definitely gear this towards where you want it to go. Like say you have a particular type of system you want in this game we're building. I'm definitely listening to the people that are helping me out. And anyways, that stuff would be really helpful. But as usual, this stuff is free for most of you, and I'll just kind of take it where I want. And if you do make any donations, you can definitely have your say in where this thing goes. So I hope to see you around in the next video, and we'll see you soon. Thanks.